Hey guys, we are back from the break with Fernando. Have just been talking about the historical overview of China. We started with the civil war in China, the war against Japan, and then the role that China took since they joined the United Nations and the non-interventionist approach to the world. But actually, after 1972, this kind of changed, right, Fernando? So how can we understand China nowadays? What did change after 1972?
So after 1972, China slowly gets back into the international sphere, gets back to the United Nations, but with Mao Zedong in power, nothing changed majorly. Mm-hmm. However, at the end of the 70s, Mao Zedong passes. And after his passing, many things happen. Mao had designed a successor, and also Mao had left a wife that was also a big power player in the time, and she tried to grab power together with the nominated successor of Mao Zedong, with the goal of mind of keeping the status quo, which greatly benefited them. They wanted to create a cult of personality around Mao that will enshrine their power forever and just keep things running as usual. However, in comes Deng Xiaoping, the guy that you guys can see in the screen, which had been another of the parents of the Chinese Communist state. Deng Xiaoping was a staunch communist. However, he was much more pragmatic and realistic than Mao Zedong. And he was more of a politician rather than a Christ-like figure like Mao had ended up being. Mao turned himself into a Christ-like figure, while Deng Xiaoping was an actual chairman, like a politician, a political oriented person. Deng Xiaoping positioned himself thanks to the help of many people in the government who were scared of the prospect of a mini Mao Zedong or a Mao Zedong light. They were very scared of that idea, so they quickly helped Deng Xiaoping grab power. Deng Xiaoping had been purged several times from the Chinese government, but brought back by Mao Zedong himself because he knew of Deng Xiaoping's great skills. So in comes Deng Xiaoping, who is a great politician and who is, despite being a staunch communist, as I said, was widely known because of one sentence he said. He's like, I don't care if the cat is white or if the cat is black, as long as the cat catches mice. And he was then understood to be a great pragmatic. Mm-hmm. And with this pragmatism came the notion that China could not survive on its own, that the autocratic style that Mao Zedong had forced on the Chinese government for so many years was not working. And so with Deng Xiaoping slowly comes an opening of Chinese economy and society, very, very slow at the beginning, with the opening of some economic free areas in cities like Shanghai, like Beijing, like the port cities in the East Coast were open for business, meaning places where companies could come and start working in a kind of like capitalism system. But of course, the overall of China, the overall of government did not change.
Mm-hmm. Obviously,
fast forward many years, and we have a system like the free economic areas that Deng Xiaoping created had taken over the whole of China. But still, you could see that some of the biggest motors, like the biggest centers of Chinese production and Chinese enterprise centers, are in the original free economic areas that Deng Xiaoping set up because of the sheer weight that they gained in the 80s and 90s. But of course, from the 80s to the 2000s, the change comes way too fast, way too rapidly for me to explain in 15 minutes. But what you need to understand is that Chinese went from a system of autocratic economic production and cult of personality for Mao Zedong to a system created by Deng Xiaoping, in which power would be shared with all the communist leaders. That it will be that no leader could be in power for more than 10 years. that basically what Deng Xiaoping did was create a system of transmission of power that was clear for everybody inside of China and outside of China, and that everybody could agree on, in which no leader would have too much power to avoid repeating the mistakes that Mao Zedong had created. Now, as we were saying before, as Pablo highlighted, we were talking about how China had gone from a completely closed system, and then when they came to the international sphere, they were clear proponents of non-interventionism. Basically, they were kind of like licking their wounds, if you may, from all the occupation by fascist Japan and by the Western powers. So they were very concerned with people coming into China, taking advantage of their country. Fast forward to 2000, and then we have China actually setting up shop in places like Africa, places like Latin America, places like even United States and Europe. Basically, China has become a economic powerhouse thanks to their economic policies, and thanks to the a lot of conditions that had happened in the international arena. One of them was them signing as non-aligned countries and establishing themselves as a country in underdeveloped economically, which helped it access policies and access some conditions in the international arena that they could have not otherwise. But as I was saying, now if you fast forward to 2000, 2010, 2020, we have China actually setting up shop in a lot of African countries, investing massive quantities of money in African companies, African governments. So we have a great deal of a great shift of priorities for China. China is now still namely protecting non-interventionism, and that is one of the main lines of discussion for them. Basically, they will always, whenever there's any problem, any conflict in the international arena, when there was the Iraqi war, when there was the Afghan war, whatever there was any kind of conflict, they would always say, nobody should intervene, this is a private affair. However, as well as that, China has been using its economic power to clearly take hold of many countries, affecting these countries' policies. This is a mixture of hard power, because we can, as Pablo has explained in previous classes, there's the hard power, which is military and economic, and there's the soft power, the power of convincing others. So you could argue that China's soft power is very, very, very tied to their hard power economic one. However, it is also true that many, many countries are acting in ways that they would see China, that hoping to attract China's attention and China's China's approval, in order to access the vast quantities of money that China has to invest. One of these places is Africa. China has been building roads, has been building highways, has been building trains, has been building factories, to the point that Africa is very indebted to China, and their development is very tied to China's development. And even fast forward to these last 5 years, in which China has openly established itself as a soft power country by trying to attract people interest with the Belt and Road Initiative, which is kind of establishing a belt around China of countries that are economically sound thanks to Chinese investment, and attracted to China because of Chinese investment and Chinese economy. So that is how China has been playing its role in the international arena in the last 5 to 10 years, basically trying to convince others that, look, my system works, my system gives economic welfare, and therefore you should respect me and you should play nice with me. Not only respect me as not intervene, but actually try to appease me, try to play ball with me, so we can have a relationship.
So
Of
moving
course,
on,
there's the
Fernando, I mean, this is how it worked in the international arena, but domestically, these four cardinal principles, what do they mean for China, and how does that affect what China is nowadays?
absolutely. So as we were saying, China has in the last 10, 20 years has switched from an international center country to an from an national center country to an international center country. But for Chinese communist government, the Chinese communist government, they saw what happened to Russia. They saw the Russian system crumble in front of their very eyes. So what the Chinese government decided to do was to create a set of principles to avoid this ever happening to them. They were too scared, and if many students might be young, but they remember that Fukuyama said this is when the Soviet Union fell. They said this is the end of history. This is inevitable. This is how every country will do. Countries will start open economically and then become democratic societies. This was honestly believed to be the only way. But China said, that's not going to be us. That's not the only way. And this is how we're going to keep it together. So the way they wanted to keep it together was to create these four cardinal principles. The four cardinal principles are enshrined partly in the constitution, partly in the government, partly in at every level of government, of executive branch, of legislative branch. Basically, these four principles are enshrined there. Impossible, basically. What these four cardinal principles mean is that if you read them in the screen, nobody can oppose the Communist Party. Mm-hmm. Upholding the socialist path, upholding the People's Democratic Dictatorship, upholding the leadership of the Communist Party of China, and upholding Mao Zedong's thought and Marxist-Leninism are four different ways of saying the government, which is the only entity able to interpret Mao Zedong's thought, to interpret what socialism and Chinese communism is, interpret what democratic dictatorship means, is the only agent, is the only institution that needs to be preserved at all costs. Mm-hmm. Anything that opposes any of these principles, meaning anything that opposes the Communist Party of China, is an affront to China itself, and therefore is non-negotiable. Mm-hmm. This is very important to understand. These four principles are non-negotiable. Mao Zedong's thought has been manipulated, has been interpreted to mean very different things, even opposing things in the last 25 years. It has been used to uphold a communism centered in agriculture and a communism centered in factories and industrial production. It has been used to uphold international policies and to oppose international policies. But at the end of the day, what it means is if you oppose the Chinese Communist Party of China, the Communist Party of China, then you're opposing the whole of China, and then you will be destroyed and prosecuted.
And there's one extra principle that...
Correct. There's an extra principle that has a lot of weight in the international arena. These four last principles are both valid for national policies and international policies. You either respect the Chinese Communist Party as the only agent possible, or you are an enemy of China. But when China gained enough power and enough weight in the international arena, a further principle came to rise, which was there is only one China, and Chinese territory is inseparable. You cannot fragment Chinese territory in any safe sense of form. Again, this only comes about when China actually has the might to enforce it. They could not oppose Taiwan forming close ties with the United States at the beginning. They could not oppose conflicts with India at the beginning in the border with in Tibet area, in the mountain ranges. They could not. But when China gained enough power and enough traction, sure enough, they came to defend that there is only one China. Mm-hmm. Now, they were greatly benefited by early policies of Taiwan, Taiwan also understand there's only one China. Taiwan doesn't, it's complicated now. There's majority shifting, but basically Taiwan didn't want to be Taiwan, the country. Taiwan wanted to be China. just they didn't want to be communist China. But now we have the Chinese government saying Taiwan does not exist. Taiwan is China. It's just we're separated at the moment. The same way with Hong Kong. Hong Kong was a British colony, but China always claimed they were part of their territory, and finally got it back at the early 2000, at the end of the 90s.
And claims.
So
oh, sorry, Fernando. Sorry? You were going to say?
No. So and the same way as Taiwan, China has. At the beginning, it was kind of like a protective measure. There's only one territory of China, and it's wholly beneath our control, and it should be respected at all costs. Very defensive. You cannot mess with us. But now it has gone slightly into the offensive. What you see in your screens is the territory claimed by China as part of vital China. Now, I don't want you to use the concept of vital China to set in your mind's ideas of the vital space of Nazi Germany. But however, it has kind of similar connotations in as much as China has used military might, economic power, and international organizations to ensure that everything in those lines that you see there is considered Chinese territory. It was 4-5 years ago that China declared the 9-dash line, meaning an exclusivity zone, which every flight, commercial or otherwise, that passes through, every boat that passes through, needs to report to the Chinese government, hey, we're going through this territory. Otherwise, they could face military intervention by China. This created quite a ruckus in the international arena, but has largely been accepted because it could not be opposed straight away without causing conflict. Now, countries have found ways around this exclusivity zone to make sure that China cannot lay a claim internationally in several years as a fait accompli that they have taken over it. But China has taken over many islands under the guise of scientific development, but they are largely military outposts, and those have been built, and they cannot be unbuilt or unoccupied without a conflict or serious negotiation. So there is a fait accompli in which China has greatly expanded the territory, taking over several islands that were contested until very recently by Japan, Vietnam, Malaysia, very countries in the area. And China has positioned itself in a very favorable position there. Yeah, Pablo?
I'm sure you will be talking about maritime law for hours, but unfortunately we have to move on. And last thing I'm going to ask you to try to understand China, I'm going to ask you about him, about Xi Jinping, and what he means as a leader of China at this time.
Absolutely. So as we were saying at the beginning, Deng Xiaoping had created a system by which power would be shared, and no one figure could take over a lot of control, that no leader will be more than 10 years. And then comes Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping was kind of a rising star, son of one of the famous communist leaders of the beginning of the Communist Party. And Xi Jinping is very charismatic, very, very powerful, and very goal-oriented. What Xi Jinping brings to the table is a bit of a blurring of the lines set by Xi Jinping, by Deng Xiaoping at the beginning of the transition to a more open society. And he has been absorbing more power than any previous communist leader before him since Mao Zedong. And he has been blurring, he has modified the constitution in 2019 to further cement his position and the position of communist leaders as the sole representatives of China. And he's already been shown favorable to abolish the time limits for his government and for his role as a president. Now, lately, with the crisis that have been happening, his position is less questioned. But at the beginning, his takeover was from the outside of China was looked with horror. We still don't know what's going to happen with Xi Jinping. Recent signs point to his designating a successor. So maybe he will not be as different as previous leaders as we thought at the beginning. But from now, he still holds a lot of power, much more than any previous leader in the open period of China. And so, and with the new crisis and the new role of China in the world, we have to see what that is going to mean for Xi Jinping and for his role as a Chinese president.
And obviously that cartoon relates to what we're going to be talking about in the next vlog. Is going to be about human rights in China, and obviously the figure of Xi Jinping. Well, that's a way of going around censorship. But yeah, fantastic, Fernando. I mean, I think it's very clear that this gives us a bit more of understanding of China nowadays and how China behaves in the international arena. We're going to have another break, and after the break, we're going to continue talking about human rights. So see you in a minute.